Today we're overviewing how to run a Bitcoin Lightning node. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And yes, this is in response to a lot of your questions and comments. I think one huge theme has been around how to kind of manage a Bitcoin Lightning node, how to manage liquidity, channels, etc. And so in this video, I'm going to basically provide kind of an overarching framework for how I think about this and identify some of the key tools that are at your disposal for accomplishing this. This is a pretty complex topic, and so there's no way I could cover everything in one video. So again, today's going to be more of an overview and framework, and then in subsequent videos, I'm going to be deep diving and walking through specific tools such as, Thunder Hub, Ride the Lightning, and more. For those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends. It is no less than a pleasure to have you. And for those new to the channel, I welcome you as well. I know there are many of you, over 80% of you watching right this very second, are not subscribed. And so if you like this content, I invite you to consider subscribing and join us in our merry gang in cyberspace. I cover all manner of Bitcoin-related content, including tutorials on wallets, Lightning, DeFi on Bitcoin, mining, node operation, news, analysis, you name it, I cover it. But with all that out of the way, let's jump into an overarching framework and some of the key pieces that you need to think about when running a Bitcoin Lightning node. All right, so disclaimer, this video somewhat assumes that you are already familiar with how the Lightning Network works. I've done a video on just that I will put up here and link in the description down below. So if you're brand new to Lightning, I would say pause this video, watch that video first, and then come back. I will try and kind of hit on some of the basic concepts as a refresher as we go along. But again, I'm kind of assuming that you already know how Lightning works, right? You have the 2 of 2 multi-sig setup when you open a payment channel. And then it's kind of like the abacus beads, right? You push funds from one side of that payment channel to the other and back and forth. And so there's this concept of local capacity or local balance and your remote capacity or remote balance, i.e. inbound and outbound liquidity. So if those are all completely foreign terms, again, I would encourage you to check out that video. But assuming you've got that kind of foundational knowledge underway, I think there's really 3 main buckets that I would think through if you're considering running a Bitcoin Lightning node. The first is actually like defining what you want to accomplish with it. And for me, there's sort of 2 key categories. One is a more just sort of personal use. You want to, use the Lightning Network in a way that is most high privacy, censorship resistant, etc. And so you'd want to, use your own node. And so for that, like the tools that you'd want to use are slightly different than the second category, which is you actually want to run a routing node. So, you don't want to just kind of send and receive payments on the Lightning Network, which would be that first category, but rather you want to do that and also route the payments of others. And so a lot of folks will know that there's the potential to earn sats for doing that, right? As a routing node on the Lightning Network, you can set the fees that you will charge for flowing funds through the network. And so a lot of people will kind of flock and jump into this idea of like, oh, wow, that's great. I want to set up a routing node on the Lightning Network and, make a bunch of sats. And while that's certainly possible, I would sort of temper those expectations just a little bit, not to deter you from doing this. I think setting up a node on the Lightning Network is an incredibly good thing for the network and for the growth of Lightning. But in terms of your own personal ability to make a bunch of money from it, I think we're probably not quite there. I'm going to link in the description an incredible incredibly useful guide from Jameson Lopp that kind of chronicles some of his efforts and experimentation with the network and running a node. And so I would urge you, if you're going to run a node, to read this article. It's really, really good, and I'm going to kind of hit on a couple of the pieces as we go along. But as you'll see, he sort of breaks even in his early experimentation. Later on, he was up a little bit. There's other Lightning node operators that have published, a little bit of what they're kind of making, but it's not a lot, right? Like it's not going to be thousands of dollars in equivalent a year, unless the dollar hyper inflates, which it could. But that's the way to, like, don't think of this as this like huge ROI generation mechanism. You deploy some capital into the Lightning Network and you're going to make a huge return on your deployed capital for running a routing node. I don't think that's what's going to happen. However, there are still very good reasons you would want to do this. One is just to support the growth of Lightning. The more Lightning advances and grows, the more credible Bitcoin becomes as an everyday payment mechanism. And the more credible it becomes as an everyday payment mechanism, the broader adoption will swell, and ultimately this is good for Bitcoin. Now, the second reason, all the kind of economics I just described are reflective of where we are today. The network is growing incredibly fast, and so it's going to continue growing extremely, extremely fast. And so there is merit and value in being a node earlier on the network and becoming really well connected by the time that the network is really, really massively much larger than it is today. And so there is this idea of like getting a spot at the table and becoming this very kind of central node within the network. To ultimately capitalize on what will be a lot more capital flowing through this network. The other consideration too, as it relates to these two options, a more kind of personal use of your Lightning node versus wanting to really use it as a routing node, is if you're running your Lightning node on like a Raspberry Pi 4, and you're using Umbrel, that's going to be kind of a lot of what I go through. That's fine. But you may actually find merit in beefing up the hardware if you're like really, really serious about this, and if you really want to make the kind of investment over the long term. But just a couple thoughts there in terms of this first bucket of like, what is your use case? What is the reason for you wanting to run a Lightning node, personal or routing? Now, once you've sort of decided on your use case and have set up the node, the next really big bucket is, of course, opening channels, right? Like what's the kind of strategy for doing that? So probably the most helpful source to just get a lot of statistics on different Lightning nodes that are out there is 1ml.com. And I'm going to flash that up now and then go into a more thorough deep dive, as part of a quick demo in just a bit. But basically, you'll see that there's all sorts of heuristics and stats here. But you'll see if I click into something like Bitrefill here, it has various rankings across these different dimensions. So the total capacity that the node has, like how much Bitcoin is held within the network. You've got channel, which is essentially how many channels are open with this node. You've got age, so how new or old is the node on the network. You have a measure for growth, so how kind of rapid is the growth of this node, and then availability in terms of things like uptime, right? And so the lower the rank, the better, meaning the more capacity that the node has, the more kind of channel connectivity the node has. The older that it is, right? That's better. If you have, more history of your performance as a high-performing node. Obviously, if you're growing faster, that's better. And then the more uptime you have, the better. This is really, really important, right? If you're considering running a routing node, like you will need to have. It's not just like a thing you casually, kind of turn on. You need to have high uptime. If there's any risk at all of like losing power or your node going offline, that can create a lot of headaches, and it'll create headaches with your kind of channel partners. And so you'd want to have some sort of backup, etc. So there's a lot of things you want to think about. Now, your instinct might be, well, let me just go and connect to the biggest, chunkiest, most well-connected, most central nodes on the network, right? And then, I'll be good. That's certainly what you want to do if you're just running this as a personal node. You want to connect to highly connected, high capacity nodes, so that there will be no issues routing your own personal kind of payments. However, if you want to run like a routing node, that's not necessarily the optimal strategy. You're going to be rewarded as a node operator for the ability to almost fill in gaps, right? Think of it like that. Think of it like moving, you're being rewarded for moving capital as quickly as possible on this network. And so if you think about it like a toll operator, like how many tolls can you open for how many participants on the network? That's the way that you really benefit, not necessarily by connecting to just the biggest nodes that are already kind of well connected. And so you want to really think about how can you fill in the gaps. Now, there's this really cool tool that Jameson notes in his sort of article called Lightning Node Match. And I'll link this in the description as well. But basically, this allows you to enter your node ID, and it will spit out an analysis of what other nodes you could connect to that would open up the most connectivity with the fewest sort of payment hops, etc. And so this is a really cool tool. I also wouldn't just blindly take like whatever's at the top of this list. I would cross-check a few against 1ML to see some of those other statistics we just talked about. And then there's other tools that I will talk through in a moment that also will allow you to see how stable these different nodes are. By stable, I mean, they not only have high uptime, but they're also consistently able to route payments, meaning that they're probably being rebalanced at some frequency and are being operated in a high performance manner. So again, I'll link this in the description down below, but it's a really nice way to, think more critically than just kind of connecting to the biggest, baddest nodes that are out there. All right, so that's the second big bucket, right? Being strategic with how you open channels. Keep in mind, you don't have to be locked into a payment channel forever. You can close the channel out, but keep in mind that one of the big pieces that folks underestimate is the amount of on-chain transaction fees that will come with opening and closing channels. And so that's something you really need to take into account. There could be forced closures that you have no control over. And so you want to be, you're not locked in forever, but you do want to be really thoughtful because that will, if you're not, that will just eat up and rack up the transaction fees for the on-chain transactions that are required for opening and closing payment channels. Now, the third and kind of final bucket I want to lay out in this sort of overarching framework is managing liquidity. And so this is, now that you've got your nodes set up, you've got your channels opened, now you need to manage liquidity. And so there's both outbound liquidity and inbound liquidity. And again, I'll throw up this little kind of diagram that reminds us all how this works, right? You've got your local balance, which is essentially sats that you can send. Like you could send that out right now. And then you've got your remote balance, which represents the amount of sats that can be sent to you or through you in the case that you're routing the payment. And so if you have a local balance of X and a remote balance of nothing, then you have no inbound capacity. You have no inbound liquidity, and that means you cannot receive payments, period, full stop. And so managing, I think one of the most common challenges early on is how do I kind of bootstrap inbound liquidity and capacity? and how do I rebalance that and rebalance my channels to ensure that that they're well balanced and that I can route payments effectively. Now, for acquiring outbound capacity, that's pretty straightforward. Essentially, when you open a new payment channel, like it's there. That whatever you open the channel with, that will be your local balance or outbound capacity with that channel that you opened with. And so there's a number of tools that have been developed, including Loop, which I will overview a bit more in just a bit, that lets you kind of loop in and out, which means basically transitioning sats that are in the Lightning Network to on-chain addresses and vice versa, and sort of repeating this in a fashion that allows you to kind of keep channels more balanced. Of course, there's fees associated with that, but it is a pretty handy tool. There's also something called Pool, Lightning Pool, and you can actually buy inbound capacity, meaning you can pay someone to open a channel with you so that you now have that remote balance or that inbound capacity. So it's essentially a marketplace for for channel connections. There's also tools that allow you to open kind of reciprocated channels. One such example is Lightning Conductor. And so you could basically open a channel and then have them turn around and open a channel with you such that you have, you kind of have this balanced channel. And then there's also these kind of coordinated liquidity swaps. Ring of Fire is an example. Reddit lightning triangles. You may have seen some influencers on Bitcoin Twitter with these like triangle shapes, or I think there's even more polygon shapes now. But that's what these are. These are liquidity swaps to kind of open channels that have a more balanced profile in terms of liquidity. The other piece as it relates to managing liquidity is, of course, ensuring that there is sufficient liquidity for the amount of kind of payment activity that comes through your node. I think if you really, really want to run a routing node, I don't know that there's necessarily a minimum, but I don't. For example, if you want to run a routing node and you open you deploy 100,000 sats, like that's just not enough, right? That's going to get eaten up super quick. That's not enough capacity to to really kind of play a substantial role, because you're going to constantly have to be rebalancing things and refreshing liquidity if you don't have a pretty substantial amount that's deployed. So something else to think about. So those are the three big buckets, right? Think critically about your use case. Ensure that you have the appropriate setup for that use case. Now we can begin opening channels in a strategic fashion according to that use case. Again, routing node versus personal use. And then finally kind of managing liquidity within that. So with that covered, I now just want to talk about a couple of these specific tools. I'm not going to do the detailed walkthroughs in this video. I'm going to do that and reserve it for future videos, because this would just make this video way too long. But I'm going to hop into my Umbrel Lightning node and point out a couple of the best tools that are there and sort of comment on what they do. And then again, we'll cover that in more depth in future videos. All right, so let's take a peek at what some of this looks like. Again, I don't want to do a full in-depth walkthrough into any of these tools in this video. Rather, I will reserve that for future videos, but here I am in my Umbrel node. If you want to open new channels, and really for most things, you'd come over to this Lightning tab. And so here you've got your Lightning wallet. You can grab your Lightning address if others want to connect to your node. And then here is where you can open channels. You'll see I really haven't done much here. I've got one open with Ben over at BT Sessions, but really haven't done too much. So I'm excited to do a lot more here. Now, again, hopping over to 1ML, this is where we can get insight into different different nodes, right? And so you could come down and see what are the top capacity nodes. So async is up here, the most connected nodes, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can certainly, as we were just discussing, connect to one of these, highly connected nodes. However, that will, that won't necessarily, if you're trying to be a routing node, that won't necessarily win the day. Because as we discussed, it's more about filling in the gaps and facilitating the transfer of capital and the flow of capital than connecting to nodes that are already well connected. So for example, if I came over, I saw a wallet of Satoshi, if I wanted to connect here, it's as simple as copying this address, and then you would want to come over to your node, open a channel, and paste in the address. And then you would want to specify the amount of sats that you wish to deploy into this channel. And then you finally have the option to, if you wish, customize your transaction fee, because again, it will be an on-chain transaction that will be conducted to actually open this channel. And then you would hit open channel. So I'm not going to do that right now necessarily, but it's pretty simple and straightforward to actually, like, the mechanics of opening a channel. I think where the thought comes in is being strategic about which channels you open with. Now, once you actually have that, there are a number of helpful apps that Umbrel has in their app store for managing your Lightning node. The three I want to highlight are Ride the Lightning, Lightning Terminal, and ThunderHub. To be perfectly honest, these all overlap a lot. It is pretty difficult to say, like, okay, yeah, use Ride the Lightning for exactly this, use Lightning Terminal for exactly this, use ThunderHub for exactly this. But I'll try and at least do a overview of kind of where they may differ. Ride the Lightning, if we click into this, is a pretty nice interface for being able to kind of rebalance channels, and kind of have this cockpit of being able to see all your different channels that are live. Has a lot of different features, as you can see. I've generally seen folks say that the interface for this is quite nice, and so if you're, maybe if you're like less of a hardcore routing node, but you still want to kind of keep your channels balanced, like, I think Ride the Lightning is probably a very good option for that. So maybe a little more casual user. If we go back, let's move on to Lightning Terminal. So Lightning Terminal is direct from Lightning Labs, and it's got a couple unique features. So, like the other apps, you can visualize your channels. You can, manage your inbound and outbound capacity, et cetera, et cetera. But what's really cool about this app is you also have Lightning Pool that I was mentioning earlier. So it's this marketplace for Lightning channels. So you could even earn sats by opening channels with others who are looking to, have inbound capacity on their end, or vice versa. If you need inbound capacity, you could pay some sats to essentially either rent a channel, or have someone open a channel with you for a set period of time. So that is one very interesting tool that I don't think is in anything else. And then it also has their Loop product that I was talking about earlier, which again is a very nice way to rebalance and manage liquidity across your channels. And then finally is ThunderHub. I would probably say of all of these, ThunderHub is probably the most holistic. Like, there is just a lot. I mean, their overview is very simple, but there is a ton that you can do in ThunderHub. And so if you're like hardcore, super hardcore, want to manage this high performing Lightning node, I would encourage you to take a look at ThunderHub because it's going to have just about everything you could possibly need to do that. And it'll probably be a little more complex than maybe Ride the Lightning, for example. But like I said, these all overlap in quite a big way. And so I honestly would recommend checking out each of them and seeing which interface you like the most. And again, just thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and which of these allows you to accomplish that most easily. In future videos, I'm going to go into each of these and kind of do a deep dive. So if you're not currently subscribed, be sure to subscribe so you can tune into all of that, which will be coming very soon. With all that out of the way, though, let's go ahead and close this video out. All right, so there you have it, my friends. We covered a lot of ground, as always, in this video. Just as a quick recap, we took a look at this kind of overarching framework that I would encourage you to think about. You know, these three big buckets of, like, what do you actually want to accomplish? Do you just want to participate in the Lightning Network from a more personal level? If so, that implies a pretty different set of tools and mindset versus if you want to actually run a high-performing routing node on the network. We also then talked about, once you've decided that, how do you go about opening channels and then managing liquidity within those channels. And then we spotlighted a couple key tools, you know, Thunder Hub, Ride the Lightning, Lightning Terminal. I think these are kind of the big three, although there are certainly others. But I would love to hear what you guys think. This video was very much in direct response to a lot of your kind of comments. And so I hope this was a helpful and useful overview. Again, this is a complex topic that I think merits some discussion before just sort of careening into using one of these specific tools. But I hope you found this valuable and useful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like, comment down below with your questions, thoughts, comments, and ideas for what you'd like to see in future videos. Is there a particular tool? Is there something completely different that you would like to see as well? I really do take that into account when making the schedule for the channel. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this here. As always, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.